It was past midnight when the office finally grew quiet. The lights from the city outside flickered against the glass windows, and I thought I was the only one left. Papers were spread across my desk, my mind tired, my eyes heavy, and then I heard the soft click of heels behind me. I turned, and there she was, her presence filling the silence in a way that made my chest tighten. She was older, confident, the kind of woman whose gaze could strip away every wall I had built around myself. I never imagined I would feel this way. Not for her. Not for a woman twice my age, someone I should have only respected from a distance. But that night, something shifted. Her voice was low, almost teasing, as she asked why I was still there. I stammered an excuse, my hands trembling as I pretended to shuffle through papers, but I could feel her moving closer. Every second stretched out, heavy and electric, until the space between us was only a breath. My heart pounded so loud I thought she could hear it. And when she leaned in, brushing her hand against mine, whether by accident or not, I knew I was in danger of losing control of everything I thought I knew about myself. That late-night office wasn't just a workplace anymore. It became the moment I stopped running from who I was. The office was never meant to feel like a second home, but in the long hours of deadlines and late-night emails, it had become just that for me. The glow of the computer screen painted the room in a pale light, and the hum of the air conditioner was the only sound keeping me company. I was exhausted but restless, determined to finish what I had started before leaving. The city outside was alive with distant sounds, car horns, laughter drifting from the streets below, but up here, it felt like I was suspended in a world of my own. I thought I was completely alone until I heard the soft echo of footsteps in the hallway. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. It was past midnight, nobody stayed this late. But the sound grew closer, distinct, steady, like a rhythm I couldn't ignore. I froze, my hand tightening around the pen in my fingers, my breath caught halfway in my chest. When the door opened and the faint light spilled in, I looked up and saw her. She stood framed in the doorway, her silhouette elegant and commanding, and for a moment I couldn't speak. She was older, much older than me, but the kind of older that carried power, the kind of presence that made the air shift the second she entered a room. My so-called aunt, though not by blood, not by any real title that should have carried meaning, just a woman I'd known through family connections, through dinners and formal events where I never imagined she'd even notice me. And yet here she was, walking toward me with the kind of slow, deliberate grace that made me feel small, exposed, unprepared. She smiled when she saw me still hunched over my work. "You're still here? At this hour?" Her voice was low, rich, the kind that wrapped around you before you had the chance to build a shield. I swallowed hard, fumbling for words, trying to explain myself, to say something casual about being behind on deadlines, but my excuse sounded weak even to my own ears. She tilted her head, studying me the way a teacher studies a student who's hiding more than they admit. There was no judgment in her eyes, only curiosity, a quiet intensity that unsettled me. I told myself not to stare, not to notice the way the light caught in her hair, or the way her blouse clung to her figure as if it had been made for her alone. But I couldn't help it. My heart was pounding too hard, and my hands refused to stay steady on the papers in front of me. She walked closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step loud in the silence, until she was standing on the other side of my desk. For a moment, I could barely breathe. She leaned down, her hand brushing over the stack of files, her perfume subtle but intoxicating, something warm and lingering that made my chest ache. "You work too hard," she murmured, almost like it was a secret. The way her eyes met mine made me feel like she could see through every layer of pretense I had. I wanted to look away, to hide from that intensity, but I couldn't. Something about her gaze rooted me to the spot. It wasn't just attention, it was focus, pure and consuming, as though for those seconds I was the only person in her world. I managed to laugh, soft and nervous, trying to brush it off with a joke about being ambitious, but the words came out too shaky to feel real. Her hand, so close to mine on the desk, shifted just slightly. It wasn't much, barely a movement, but when her skin brushed against the back of my fingers, a jolt shot through me so sharp I almost gasped. I couldn't tell if it was intentional or an accident, but the electricity of that touch burned in my veins. I pulled my hand back quickly, almost knocking over the pen, and she smiled again, but this time there was something different in it. Something knowing. Something that made my stomach twist and heat rush to my face. The silence between us grew heavy, not uncomfortable but thick with something unspoken. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the hum of the air conditioner. I wanted to say something, anything, but my tongue felt clumsy, my thoughts tangled. She straightened slowly, her eyes still on me, her lips curling in a way that wasn't a smirk but carried the weight of a secret neither of us was ready to say out loud. "Don't stay too late," she said finally, her voice lower, softer, almost tender. Before turning toward the door, I thought that would be it, that she'd leave and I'd be left with nothing but my racing pulse and the ghost of her presence. But halfway to the door, she stopped. She glanced back at me over her shoulder, her eyes catching mine one last time, and in that look was something I couldn't decipher fully: challenge, curiosity, maybe even temptation. Whatever it was, it stayed with me long after the door clicked shut behind her. I sank back in my chair, my hands trembling as I touched the spot where her fingers had brushed mine. The papers on my desk blurred in front of me. It didn't matter how late it was or how much work I had left. The only thing I could think about was her. The woman I was never supposed to think of this way. The woman who had just shattered every certainty I thought I had about who I was and what I wanted. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, a trick of exhaustion, a spark that meant nothing in the larger scheme of my life. But deep down, in the hollow of my chest where truth hides, I knew it wasn't nothing. I knew something had begun in that quiet office, something dangerous and irresistible, something that would not let me go. The next morning, I woke with a strange heaviness in my chest, as if the night before had left a mark on me that even sleep couldn't erase. My apartment was small and plain, filled with the scent of stale coffee and paper from the scattered documents I had brought home, but none of it mattered. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight spilling in through the blinds, and all I could see was her face. Her eyes, the way she had looked back at me before leaving, the soft brush of her hand against mine, it replayed in my mind like a film stuck on loop. I tried to shake it off, to bury myself in routine. Shower, breakfast, emails. But every movement felt slow, disconnected, as though I was walking through fog. My hands trembled when I buttoned my shirt, and more than once I caught myself staring at my reflection in the mirror, whispering, "It was nothing. It doesn't mean anything." Yet the hollow sound of those words betrayed me. When I arrived at the office, the world seemed normal enough. Colleagues chatted in the hallways, phones rang endlessly, printers hummed with their mechanical rhythm. Nobody knew that my entire night had been haunted by her presence. I sat at my desk, forcing myself into work, pretending that deadlines and meetings were all that mattered. But my eyes betrayed me, drifting toward the corner office where she worked whenever she visited the building. The door was closed, but the mere knowledge that she was inside made the air feel heavier, charged in a way I couldn't explain. Every time someone walked by, my heart jumped, hoping and fearing it might be her. Hours dragged by, but I couldn't escape her shadow. I went to the break room for coffee, trying to clear my head. As I poured sugar into the cup, I caught a glimpse of her in the reflection of the vending machine glass. She was standing across the room, speaking quietly with another manager, her posture confident, her voice steady and calm. Nothing in her demeanor betrayed what had happened last night. She laughed at something the man said, and I felt a sting of jealousy I didn't want to admit to myself. What right did I have to feel that? She wasn't mine. She could never be mine. And yet, I couldn't look away. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, every smile aimed like an arrow that struck too close to my heart. When our eyes met across the room, it was only for a second, but it was enough. My stomach flipped, and my fingers nearly dropped the cup of coffee I was holding. She didn't break her conversation, didn't give any sign of recognition, but in that fleeting moment, I thought I saw something in her gaze. A glimmer of acknowledgement. A flicker of the same fire that had burned in me all night. My throat went dry, and I hurried back to my desk, desperate to hide, desperate to breathe. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I finished my tasks with robotic precision, but my thoughts never left her. By the time evening came, most of the office had emptied out, leaving behind only a few lingering employees. I told myself I wouldn't stay late again, that I wouldn't put myself in the same position as last night, but my body betrayed me. I stayed, hunched over files, pretending I still had things to finish. Deep down, I knew the truth. I was waiting. Waiting for something I couldn't admit, waiting for her to notice me again. When the halls grew quiet and the city lights began to glow outside, I heard it. The sound of heels clicking against the floor, steady, measured, deliberate. My heart leapt to my throat. I didn't look up right away. I couldn't. The air shifted as she stepped into the room, her presence undeniable. She stopped just behind me, and the silence stretched, heavy and intimate. Then her voice came, soft but carrying that same weight that had unsettled me the night before. You stayed late again. I turned to face her, my pulse quickening, my throat dry. I tried to explain, fumbling over words about work and deadlines, but she only raised an eyebrow, as if she could see through every flimsy excuse. She stepped closer, and I could feel the warmth of her body near mine, the faint trace of her perfume wrapping around me again. My hands clenched against the desk to keep from trembling. You're too young to burn yourself out like this, she said softly, her eyes scanning my face, lingering just long enough to make my breath catch. There was no scolding in her tone, only something gentler, something that made my chest ache. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't the work keeping me here, that it was her, that I couldn't stop thinking about her since last night. But the words caught in my throat, too dangerous to let out. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the silence thick with everything neither of us dared to say. Then, slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was so light, so fleeting, yet it felt like fire against my skin. My breath hitched, and I leaned back slightly, caught between wanting to escape and wanting to lean closer. Her eyes softened, almost apologetic, and she pulled her hand back as though reminding herself of the line she shouldn't cross. She gave me a small smile, one that carried both warmth and restraint, before whispering, "Don't stay too late. It's not worth it." And just like the night before, she turned and walked toward the door. But this time, she didn't look back. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway, leaving me alone again with the echo of her touch and the storm raging inside me. I buried my face in my hands, trembling, my chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I didn't know what scared me more, that she might never touch me again, or that she already knew I wanted her to. The days that followed turned into a strange rhythm I had never known before. Every morning I walked into the office, telling myself it was just another day of work, another set of tasks and deadlines that had nothing to do with her. Yet my body betrayed me every time. My eyes searched for her the second I stepped into the building. My ears tuned to the sound of her voice even when she spoke in another room. She wasn't always there, and sometimes whole days passed without me catching even a glimpse of her, but the anticipation gnawed at me. The hope of seeing her again lingered under my skin like a secret hunger. Even when she wasn't around, her presence lived in my memory, haunting me in ways I couldn't escape. At night, when I tried to sleep, my mind replayed the brush of her hand against mine, the way she had tucked that stray hair behind my ear, and most of all, the look in her eyes. It wasn't just kindness. It wasn't just familiarity. It was something else, something unspoken but undeniable. I wondered if she knew what it did to me. I wondered if she felt it. 2:1 Late afternoon, the office was quieting down as people gathered their bags and said their goodbyes. I was staying late again, though I barely had enough work to justify it. My desk lamp cast a soft glow over the papers I wasn't really reading, and I told myself I should go home. Just as I was about to pack up, I heard that sound again. The steady rhythm of her heels against the floor, the sound that had become both my greatest comfort and my greatest fear. My pulse quickened before I even looked up. She entered the room with the same quiet authority as always, her gaze sweeping the space until it landed on me. "You're still here," she said, and though the words were the same as before, something in her tone was different this time. It wasn't teasing, and it wasn't concerned. It was softer, heavier, as though she had been expecting me to be there, as though part of her already knew why I stayed. I forced a smile and mumbled something about deadlines, but the excuse fell flat between us. She walked closer, her steps unhurried, her eyes never leaving mine. The air grew thicker with every inch she closed between us. She stopped by my desk, her hand resting lightly on the edge of it. I could smell her perfume, subtle but rich, and it made me dizzy. "You're always working so hard," she said quietly. "Don't you ever get tired of being the last one here?" I tried to laugh, but it came out weak, shaky, betraying the storm inside me. "I don't mind," I said, though the truth was that I minded too much. I minded because of what these late nights were doing to me, what they were awakening in me that I couldn't control. For a long moment, she said nothing. She simply looked at me, her gaze searching, weighing, as if she were trying to decide something important. My chest tightened under the weight of that silence. Then, without warning, she walked around the desk and came to stand beside me. My body tensed as she leaned down slightly, her arm brushing against mine as she pointed at the papers spread across the desk. "You missed a number here," she said, her voice so close that her breath warmed my cheek. I swallowed hard, nodding, though I hadn't even registered what she was pointing at. All I could focus on was the nearness of her, the way her presence enveloped me. She lingered longer than necessary, her hand resting on the desk beside mine, her face close enough that if I turned my head just slightly, our lips might have met. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I wanted to move, to escape, but I also wanted to stay frozen in that moment forever. I had never felt so torn in my life. Finally, she straightened, her expression unreadable, though her eyes flickered with something that made my stomach twist. "Careful with the details," she said softly, almost like it was more than just advice about work. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat, unable to reply. She gave me a long look, then smiled faintly and turned toward the door. I thought she would leave, but at the doorway she paused. Her hand lingered on the frame, and she glanced back at me over her shoulder. This time, the look was different, longer, deeper, filled with a quiet intensity that left me breathless. Then she left, the sound of her heels fading again into the silence. I slumped back in my chair, my whole body trembling. It was becoming unbearable. These moments, these stolen silences, the touches that felt too intentional to be accidents, they were pulling me deeper into something I couldn't escape. I pressed my hands to my face, whispering to myself that I had to stop, that this was dangerous, forbidden, impossible. But even as I said it, I knew it was already too late. A line had been crossed, even if neither of us had spoken it aloud. and every part of me was aching to see how far we would go. The following week dragged on in a haze of confusion and restless energy. I tried to bury myself in work, keeping my head down, convincing myself that if I kept busy enough, these feelings would fade. But they didn't. They only grew louder, more insistent, pressing against the walls of my chest every time I thought of her. And I thought of her constantly. She was everywhere, woven into the rhythm of my days, hidden between the words of every email I typed, lingering in the silence of my nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I tried to tell myself it was just admiration, that she was simply older and more experienced, that what I felt was a foolish crush that would pass. But my heart refused to listen to reason. It pulsed with a need that frightened me. One evening, as the office slowly emptied, I found myself staring at the clock, waiting. I told myself I would leave early, that I wouldn't let history repeat itself, but my hands moved slower than my thoughts, my body betraying me as I organized papers I didn't need to sort. By the time the last of my colleagues waved goodnight and the lights in the hall dimmed, I was still there. Alone again. Or so I thought. The familiar sound of heels echoed down the corridor, faint at first, then louder, closer. My chest tightened, and my breath caught in my throat. When she appeared in the doorway, her presence was both expected and shocking all at once. She didn't speak right away, just looked at me with that same unreadable expression, her eyes glimmering with something I couldn't name. I tried to smile, tried to act casual, but it felt forced. My fingers fumbled with the papers, and my voice cracked as I mumbled some excuse for why I was still at my desk. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sent a shiver through me. The sound was small, but it changed everything. It sealed us in together, cutting off the rest of the world. She walked closer, her movements unhurried, deliberate. The quiet between us was heavy, charged with all the things we hadn't said. When she reached my desk, she leaned against it, crossing her arms, her eyes never leaving mine. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" she said softly. Her tone was half amusement, half something deeper. I tried to laugh, but my voice betrayed me, shaky and unsure. She tilted her head, studying me, and for a moment I felt like she could see everything I was trying so hard to hide. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," she said finally, her gaze drifting over me before settling back on my face. "Always pushing, always staying late, always trying to prove something." Her words should have felt like advice, like a mentor speaking to someone still finding their way. But the way she said them, the way her eyes lingered on me, made them feel like something else. More intimate. More dangerous. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't want to disappoint anyone," I whispered, unsure why I had said it, why I felt the need to confess something so raw in that moment. She softened, her expression shifting, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out. Her hand brushed against mine on the desk, deliberate this time, not an accident, not a fleeting touch. Her fingers lingered, warm and steady, and the world around me seemed to fall away. My breath hitched, and I couldn't move. Her eyes locked with mine, and in them I saw the reflection of everything I had been feeling. The tension, the pull, the fear, the desire. It was there, undeniable. She didn't speak, and neither did I. Words felt too fragile, too small for the weight of that moment. Her thumb traced lightly over my knuckles, a simple gesture that felt more intimate than anything I had ever known. I wanted to pull away, to protect myself, to run from the danger of what this meant. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. Every part of me leaned toward her, drawn by something I couldn't fight anymore. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, my pulse racing, my thoughts tangled. She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable, then let out a slow breath. "You're playing with fire," she whispered, her voice low, almost trembling. Her words struck me hard, because I knew they were true. But even as she said them, her hand didn't leave mine. If anything, her grip tightened slightly, as though she couldn't let go. My body burned with confusion, with longing, with fear. I nodded faintly, unable to speak, my throat too tight with emotion. Finally, she let go, her hand slipping away slowly, leaving my skin tingling where her touch had been. She straightened, stepping back, putting space between us again. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name, regret, perhaps, or restraint. "Go home," she said softly, her tone firmer now, though her voice carried a gentleness I hadn't heard before. Then she turned and walked toward the door. I watched her leave, my body frozen, my heart aching. The sound of her heels faded into the hallway once more, and I was left with the silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was heavier, deeper, filled with the weight of what had just passed between us. I buried my face in my hands, trembling, my mind a storm of emotions I couldn't name. I knew she was right. I knew this was dangerous, that it could shatter everything if we gave in. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away. It was only just beginning. The days after that encounter were unbearable. I carried the weight of her touch on my skin like an invisible burn, something no one else could see but that consumed me from the inside out. At work, I moved through the motions of my tasks with a kind of mechanical precision, but my mind was never present. Every glance at the hallway, every sound of footsteps, every shift in the office atmosphere left me tense and restless, wondering if she would appear again. I hated how much power she had over me, how easily she lived inside my thoughts without even trying. At night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it all, that she hadn't meant anything by it, that I was twisting innocent gestures into something forbidden because of my own restless heart. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining. The way her hand lingered, the way her voice softened when she spoke to me, the way she closed the door as if cutting off the rest of the world, those weren't accidents. They were choices. Quiet, careful choices that left me drowning in questions. One evening, I left work earlier than usual, telling myself distance would make it easier. I walked home through the crowded streets, the city buzzing with life, couples laughing in the glow of streetlights, the air filled with the sound of cars and chatter. But none of it touched me. I felt detached, lost in my own head, carrying a secret too heavy for my body. I thought of her at every turn, wondering what she was doing, if she thought of me too, or if she had already decided to forget. The thought of her forgetting left a hollow ache in my chest, a quiet panic I couldn't shake. The next morning, I avoided her completely. I saw her from a distance once, speaking to a group near the elevators, her posture graceful and commanding as always. I ducked my head and walked the other way, my heart thudding like I had done something wrong. I couldn't face her. Not yet. I needed to gather myself, to figure out what I wanted, to decide if I was strong enough to either step away or step closer. But the truth was, I already knew the answer. My resistance was paper thin, and every day it grew weaker. By the end of the week, it happened again. The office emptied as night fell, leaving behind only the hum of lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. I told myself I would pack up and leave, but my body betrayed me again, lingering, waiting. And then she appeared. Her figure filled the doorway like a shadow I had been anticipating all along. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me with that same searching gaze that always left me undone. When she finally stepped inside, the door clicked shut behind her, and the sound wrapped around me like a seal, locking us in our secret world again. "You're here," she said softly, almost like she was relieved. My throat tightened, and I managed a nod, my hands trembling slightly where they rested on the desk. She came closer, her movements slow, careful, as though she was testing the ground between us. When she stood beside me, the air thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. I could feel her presence radiating, pulling me in like a tide I couldn't resist. "You know this is dangerous," she whispered, her voice low, her eyes locked on mine. The way she said it wasn't a warning anymore, it was a confession. My chest ached, and I swallowed hard, trying to find words, but nothing came. The silence stretched, and with every second it became clearer that we were standing at the edge of something neither of us could ignore anymore. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately, until it brushed against mine on the desk. This time, there was no hesitation, no pretense of accident. Her fingers curled around mine, and my breath caught in my throat. Heat spread through my body, and the world tilted as I let myself fall into that touch. Her grip was firm, steady, grounding me in a storm I no longer wanted to escape. "I shouldn't," she whispered, but her hand didn't let go. I could hear the conflict in her voice, the battle between restraint and desire, and it mirrored the war raging inside me. My lips parted, but the only thing that escaped was a shaky breath. The words I wanted to say, "I want you, I can't stop thinking about you, I need this," stayed trapped in my chest, heavy and dangerous. She leaned closer, so close that her shoulder brushed mine, so close that I could feel the warmth of her breath against my cheek. My body trembled, caught between fear and longing, but I didn't move away. I couldn't. I was rooted in place, my heart beating so hard it felt like it might shatter my ribs. Her eyes flickered down to my lips, just for a second, and the room spun. Then she pulled back, her hand slipping from mine, her breath sharp as though she was forcing herself to break free. "Not tonight," she said, her voice firm but trembling at the edges. "Go home." And before I could respond, she turned and walked out, leaving me sitting in the silence, my body trembling, my soul aching with the weight of what almost happened. I pressed my palms against the desk, my knuckles white, my heart racing. The room felt too small, too heavy, like it could no longer contain everything building inside me. I knew she was right. I knew we were playing with something that could destroy us both. But I also knew there was no turning back now. We had already stepped too close to the edge, and sooner or later, one of us was going to fall. The weekend came, but instead of feeling like a break, it felt like a prison. I spent the days pacing my small apartment, trying to escape my thoughts, but everything reminded me of her. The way the sunlight hit the coffee table made me think of the glow in her hair under the office lights. The sound of the television in the background reminded me of her low, steady voice, and even the silence of the night wrapped around me like the silence of those late hours we had spent together. I told myself I needed distance, I needed to breathe, but the truth was I ached for her in a way that left me restless. I checked my phone more times than I could count, though I knew she wouldn't call. We had never exchanged numbers, never crossed that boundary, and yet I longed for it, longed for her to break the silence with even the smallest word. When Monday arrived, I felt both terrified and eager. I dressed carefully, paying attention to details I usually ignored, wondering if she would notice. At the office, my nerves buzzed as I tried to focus on my work, but every sound in the hallway made my heart jump. Hours passed with no sign of her, and I tried to convince myself it was better that way. But late in the afternoon, as the sun dipped and the sky outside turned orange, I caught sight of her through the glass walls of her office. She was standing by the window, phone pressed to her ear, her profile sharp and elegant in the fading light. I froze where I was, unable to move, just watching her. When she ended her call and turned, her eyes found me instantly, as though she had known I was there all along. My breath caught, and I quickly looked away, pretending to shuffle papers. But my skin burned from the weight of her gaze. That evening, the office thinned out once more, and I tried to leave early, to save myself from repeating the cycle. I gathered my things and headed toward the elevator, but just as the doors were about to close, I heard her voice. Soft, firm, unmistakable. "Stay." The single word froze me in place. I turned, and she was standing a few steps behind, her expression unreadable. My hands tightened around the strap of my bag, and for a moment, I thought of refusing, of saving myself. But my feet betrayed me, carrying me back inside, back into the silence of the office. She didn't speak as I followed her down the hall, my heart thundering in my chest. When she opened the door to her office, I hesitated, but she gave me a look that pulled me in without a word. She closed the door behind us, the quiet click sealing us into the dim room. The only light came from the city outside, spilling through the tall windows and bathing the space in silver and gold. She stood near her desk, her hands resting on the polished surface, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Why do you stay late?" she asked, her voice low, steady. It wasn't the first time she had asked, but this time it wasn't casual, it wasn't teasing. It was direct, demanding truth. My mouth went dry, and I searched for an answer, but all the excuses felt meaningless. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on mine, and my chest ached from holding everything in. "Is it really the work?" she pressed, her voice softer now, almost tender. My lips parted, and the words trembled on my tongue, words I had been holding back for weeks. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The silence after that was deafening. She looked at me, her expression shifting, her breath catching just slightly, as though my confession had cracked something open inside her. She took another step, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might drown out my words, but somehow, I found them. "Because of you," I breathed. The moment the words left me, I felt both terrified and relieved. Terrified of what it meant, relieved that the truth was no longer locked inside me. Her eyes softened, her lips parting as if she wanted to respond but couldn't find the words. For a long, unbearable moment, we just stood there, the weight of my confession hanging between us. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against my arm. The touch was gentle, hesitant, but it sent a rush of heat through me, a wave of emotion I couldn't contain. I leaned into it without meaning to, my body betraying the desire I had tried so hard to suppress. "You don't know what you're doing," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, filled with conflict. But her hand didn't pull away. It lingered, warm and steady, as though her body was betraying her too. I shook my head, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "I know," I said softly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." My voice cracked, but the truth in it was undeniable. Her breath hitched, and she closed her eyes for a moment, as if fighting with herself. When she opened them again, her gaze was raw, stripped of the restraint she had always carried. She leaned in, so close that her forehead nearly touched mine, her breath mingling with mine in the heavy silence. My heart raced, my body trembling, but I didn't move away. I couldn't. I was caught in her gravity, in the inevitability of this moment. Her hand slid from my arm to my hand, fingers intertwining with mine, and the world fell away. For a moment, time stopped. There were no rules, no boundaries, no consequences. There was only her hand in mine, her breath on my skin, her presence overwhelming me in the quiet of the office. She whispered my name, so softly I almost thought I imagined it, and in that sound was everything: fear, longing, surrender. My chest ached with the weight of it, and I knew there was no going back. Whatever line we had tried not to cross, we had already stepped over it in our hearts. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't with the same resolve as before. Her eyes lingered on me, her hand refusing to let go of mine. She looked at me as though memorizing me, as though she wanted to say something she couldn't. Then, finally, she whispered, "This can't be simple." Her voice was thick with emotion, but her fingers still clung to mine. I nodded faintly, my throat too tight to speak, tears threatening to spill. I knew she was right. It wouldn't be simple. It would be complicated and messy and dangerous. But I also knew I didn't care. I would rather fall into the fire with her than live another day pretending I didn't feel this way. The next days unfolded with a strange new rhythm, one that felt both terrifying and intoxicating. Everything between us had changed after that night in her office, even though no one else could see it. To everyone around us, she was still the composed, competent woman she had always been, and I was still the hard-working one who stayed late too often. But underneath that surface, every glance carried a weight, every silence felt heavy with the truth we were now unable to deny. When our eyes met across the office floor, even for the briefest second, my chest would tighten as if she had reached across the distance and touched me. The smallest brush of her hand against mine in passing felt like a secret message, and though we never spoke of what had been said that night, the bond between us deepened in ways that terrified me. I spent my days pretending to be fine, pretending to focus on reports and meetings, but my nights were restless. I lay awake replaying her voice, the way she had whispered my name, the trembling of her hand when she held mine. I thought of the conflict in her eyes, the way she had told me it wouldn't be simple, and I knew she was right. It wasn't simple. She was older, tied to a life I could barely imagine, a life built on rules and appearances. And me, I was young, restless, still trying to find myself. Everything about us was complicated, but no matter how much I told myself to let it go, my heart clung to her like it had always belonged to her. One evening, the office was nearly empty again. I sat at my desk long after the others had left, though I had finished my work hours ago. My body ached from exhaustion, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. I kept staring at the door to her office, the faint light glowing under it, wondering if she was thinking of me too. When the door finally opened and she stepped out, I felt my breath hitch. She moved with the same grace as always, but when her eyes found mine, the air shifted. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward me. "You're still here," she said softly, her words familiar now, but the way she spoke them felt different. Quieter. More vulnerable. I tried to smile, but it faltered under the weight of her gaze. She walked closer, until she was standing by my desk, her hand brushing against the stack of papers as if to steady herself. For a moment, she said nothing, and the silence between us grew thick with all the things neither of us dared to say. Finally, she lowered her voice. "I can't stop thinking about you." The words hit me like a storm, knocking the air out of my lungs. My heart raced, and for a second I thought I had misheard. But the look in her eyes told me I hadn't. My throat tightened, and I whispered, "Neither can I." It was the simplest truth I had ever spoken, and saying it out loud felt like opening a door I could never close again. She closed her eyes briefly, as if pained by her own confession, then opened them again with a raw honesty that made my chest ache. "You're too young," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "And I'm too." She stopped, unable to finish, as though even naming the distance between us would make it too real. But the words didn't matter. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill as I whispered, "I don't care." Something inside her broke then, something that had been holding her back all this time. She reached for my hand, her fingers curling around mine with urgency, as though she had been fighting the need for far too long. My body trembled under her touch, and I let out a shaky breath, holding on as though I might lose her if I didn't. She leaned closer, her forehead pressing lightly against mine, and I felt the world slip away. There was no office, no rules, no years between us. There was only the warmth of her skin, the sound of her breath, the weight of her presence filling every corner of me. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, neither of us daring to move, both of us caught in the gravity of something bigger than either of us could control. My eyes closed, and for the first time I allowed myself to feel it fully, the longing, the fear, the surrender. When she finally pulled back, her eyes shimmered with emotion, her lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came. She just looked at me, as though trying to memorize me, to carve me into her memory. Her hand trembled as she let mine go, and the loss of her touch was like a wound. She straightened, composing herself, but her voice broke when she whispered, "I don't know how to stop." The admission sent shivers through me, because it was the one thing I had been afraid to admit to myself. I reached for her hand again, but she pulled it back quickly, shaking her head, her eyes filled with conflict. "Not here," she said softly, almost pleading. "Not like this." The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg her to stop fighting it. But I didn't. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, my chest aching, as she turned and walked away. This time she didn't tell me to go home. This time she left me with nothing but the echo of her footsteps and the knowledge that we were both drowning in something too deep to escape. When the door closed behind her, I buried my face in my hands, my tears spilling freely at last. I was terrified, lost, and yet, beneath the fear, there was a quiet certainty that no matter how hard we tried, this story between us wasn't over. It was only pulling us closer, inch by inch, into a fire neither of us could resist. The days leading to what became the breaking point felt like a blur of tension and unspoken words. I moved through them as if carrying a secret flame inside me, one that burned brighter with every stolen glance, every soft exchange that lingered too long to be casual. She avoided me sometimes, disappearing into her office with the door shut, her face unreadable when we passed in the hall. Other times, her eyes caught mine for a fraction of a second, and it was enough to leave me shaken, enough to remind me that what had grown between us was alive, raw, and impossible to erase. I told myself to focus on my work, to bury myself in deadlines and emails, but no matter how many hours I stared at the screen, all I saw was her face, all I felt was the memory of her hand trembling in mine. At night, I lay awake with my heart aching, wondering if she was lying in her bed doing the same. Then came the night it all unraveled. The office was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost expectant. I had stayed late again, though I had no real reason. The city lights spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. I heard her footsteps before I saw her, steady but slower than usual, as if she carried the weight of something heavy. When she appeared, she looked tired, her shoulders softer, her eyes darker, as though she hadn't slept in days. My heart twisted at the sight of her. "You're still here," she said, her voice gentle, but not the same as before. This time it wasn't a statement of surprise. It was almost as though she had hoped I would be. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer, and she walked closer, her gaze never leaving mine. The air between us felt fragile, like glass that might shatter with the wrong word. She stopped a few steps away, folding her arms as if to protect herself. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, and my chest clenched. The words pierced me, sharp and final, but her eyes told a different story. They were wet, shimmering in the dim light, filled with longing she couldn't hide no matter how hard she tried. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. "Then don't fight it," I said quietly, the words spilling out before I could think. "Don't push me away when you feel the same." Her breath caught, and she shook her head, a broken sound escaping her throat. "You don't understand, this could ruin everything. You deserve someone free, someone who can love you without shame, without hiding." Her voice cracked on the last word, and it shattered something in me. My eyes stung with tears, but I stepped closer, closing the distance she had tried to create. "I don't care about hiding," I whispered fiercely. "I don't care about the rules, or what anyone would think. I only care about you." For a moment, silence pressed between us, heavy and suffocating. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to argue, but the fight in her seemed to falter. Her body shook, her hands clenched at her sides, and then she broke. She reached for me suddenly, her arms pulling me close with a force that left me breathless. Her embrace was desperate, trembling, as though she was afraid I might vanish if she let go. I buried my face against her, my tears soaking into her shoulder, and she held me tighter, her own breath uneven against my ear. When she pulled back just enough to see me, her face was etched with raw emotion. "I'm so scared," she whispered, her fingers brushing my cheek. "Scared of what this means, scared of how much I feel for you." My heart raced as I held her gaze, and I shook my head softly. "Don't be scared," I said, my voice shaking but certain. "We'll figure it out. Together." Her lips trembled, and for a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, everything unsaid laid bare between us. Then she kissed me. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, like she was testing the waters of a truth she had denied for too long. But when I kissed her back, when my hand reached up to cup her face, the hesitation shattered. The kiss deepened, filled with everything we had held back, every sleepless night, every silent ache, every moment we had stood on the edge of falling. Time lost its meaning. The world outside the office didn't exist. There was only her warmth, her breath, the way her hands shook against me as if she was both terrified and relieved. When we finally broke apart, we were both gasping, our foreheads pressed together, our tears mingling. She whispered my name like a prayer, and I held on to her as though my life depended on it. We didn't talk about the future that night. We didn't talk about the consequences, the risks, or the fear. All of that waited outside the door, in a world that would never understand. In that room, in that moment, all that mattered was the truth we could no longer run from. She loved me, and I loved her, and no matter how impossible it seemed, it was ours. When she finally left, her hand lingered in mine until the last possible second, and as the door closed softly behind her, I knew my life had changed forever. Nothing about this would be easy, but for the first time I wasn't afraid. Because no matter what came next, I had her, and that was enough.